Come and look at the stars with me.
In Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, this swimming pool is just the right size for an evening bath. But the scene gives Daniel Baldwin a whole new perspective.
Are you all right?
Perspective is the key word here. The illusion of a giant Daryl Hannah is created with one of the oldest visual effects in the book, forced perspective.
Where do I look?
Look a little to your right. To your right.
What at first appears confusing makes perfect sense when seen through the camera's lens. Coming up, we'll meet Hollywood effects wizards who have used forced perspective to create cinema giants. And we'll see how these same special effects have been used to create some of the screen's tiniest characters. Today, size is in the eye of the beholder on Movie Magic.
California Chardonnay. Father, I'm not a little girl.
No, you're not.
Daryl Hannah plays Nancy, who grows into a very big girl in HBO Pictures' Attack of the 50-Foot Woman.
Which way up?
Daryl will spend much of her time on this movie next to miniature sets atop a 10 to 15-foot high platform.
And action.
Good night, Father.
Good night. And cut. Very nice.
Hit a moth.
Major moth action here.
The visual effect that makes Daryl and even an unwanted moth appear huge is called forced perspective. And it is the centerpiece effect in this remake of the campy 1958 sci-fi picture.
Once a normal, voluptuously beautiful woman, she drove into a nightmare of horror and saw descending from the sky a titanic monster whose fearsome touch became a frightful curse.
While the story has been updated for the remake, many of the special effects techniques used in the original 50-Foot Woman are being utilized today by producer Deborah Hill.
Hanging foreground miniatures, forced perspective, building little miniatures and putting a real-sized person in the miniatures gives the illusion that she or he is tall.
To convince audiences that Daryl Hannah has indeed grown bigger than a house, the filmmakers turned to Hollywood effects veteran Gene Warren Jr. and his crew at Fantasy II in Burbank, California. Gene won an Academy Award for his miniature effects in Terminator 2 and created memorable effects in The Terminator and Bram Stoker's Dracula. Before starting his own business, Gene worked with his father, Gene Warren Sr., who received an Academy Award in 1960 for his special effects in The Time Machine. 2 years earlier in Tom Thumb, Warren Sr. and his effects team had utilized forced perspective shots along with oversized props to create the illusion of the tiny title character.
To whom it rightfully belongs, eh?
I don't know. Maybe I should ask my father.
Now, Gene Warren Jr., together with his two sons, Christopher and Gene III, will use these time-tested techniques to create the opposite illusion. Although other optical and digital effects could be used to create giant characters, forced perspective has distinct advantages. It is extremely effective, and you can see the results right on the set.
Basic principles of forced perspective is that in the photographic process, relative size of objects is determined not necessarily by their place in space, but in their apparent scale.
For example, to make Daryl Hannah appear larger than Daniel Baldwin, she will be positioned on a raised platform in front of the camera. Daniel will be positioned in the background. The farther away he is, the smaller he appears in relation to Daryl. In Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, the setting for one of the most dramatic forced perspective shots is the swimming pool at Nancy's father's mansion. In order to achieve a dialogue scene between the bathing Nancy and her husband Harry, Gene Warren and his crew had to build an exact miniature replica of the full-size swimming pool.
Dano, do you have a 12-foot piece of speed rail there?
Accurate measurements of the pool were scaled down to create the illusion of the giant heroine. Since she's 50 feet tall, the pool is built on a 1/8 scale. To shoot this scene, Daryl Hannah sits in the miniature pool atop a 15-foot-high platform, on which the camera is also mounted. Daniel Baldwin stands next to the real pool, about 100 feet from the camera. By utilizing enough light on set and the proper camera lens, Gene is able to create a long depth of field, meaning that the objects in both the foreground and background stay in sharp focus. Thus, the illusion that the giant Nancy and small Harry are actually very close to one another.
I was wondering about something.
Wondering about what?
The brick line along the edge of the pool's deck makes a perfect dividing line between the miniature and real pools. When lined up in camera, the two blend together seamlessly on film.
There. Look a little to your right. To your right.
That looks pretty good right there, and then Daniel would just look up a little bit.
Since the actors are not occupying the positions they appear to be on film, getting them to look each other in the eye is a challenge.
Eye line is the most difficult thing in perspective shots. That's the giveaway usually. The eye line is off and it subliminally something is thrown off. People kind of start going, well, this isn't working. We just kept trying to get it as close as we could. Daryl Hannah and Daniel Baldwin were great at that.
This 3-minute scene will take 2 days to shoot. For each shot, including several on the opposite side of the real pool, the platform with the miniature pool must be moved and realigned with the background.
There's your toe.
Right. My favorite effects shot is the shot where Daniel Baldwin is walking down a path in a garden and the camera pans, and then into the shot we see Daryl in the swimming pool.
That was the very first major master shot on the pool scene, and therefore we were setting it up while the principal unit was shooting indoors in the house. And I would have that little bit of extra time in order to put a larger foreground set to cover an area.
To accomplish a camera move with forced perspective, the camera must be mounted so that it pivots on the point within its lens where the light focuses. This is known as the nodal point. When the camera pivots on a nodal, it can pan and tilt, and the background and foreground will stay married to each other.
It's seamless, and it's a huge wide shot done in the camera, and it's just my favorite shot because people are going to say how'd they do that.
Are you all right? I mean, do you feel okay otherwise?
My heart starts beating faster than normal. Would you like to feel it?
Forced perspective was one of the first special effects used by pioneer filmmakers. This 1909 short, Princess Nicotine, was directed by J. Stuart Blackton, who co-founded the Vitagraph Company of America in 1897. Big V, as the Flatbush, New York studio was known, was a leading film company of its day. In Princess Nicotine, Blackton utilized forced perspective by placing the actress on a platform far behind a normal-sized table. Amazed audiences were convinced that this tiny person was absolutely real. Forced perspective has also been used through the years to create impressive sets which would otherwise be too expensive to build. In the 1923 silent feature Scaramouche, the top of this French castle was actually a hanging miniature in the foreground of the shot. Perhaps the most impressive early hanging miniatures are in the 1925 MGM classic Ben-Hur. The lower part of the Circus Maximus set was built full-size for the violent chariot race. Special effects artist A. Arnold Gillespie designed an elaborate hanging miniature of the upper portions of the arena. The miniature gallery included 10,000 tiny, hand-operated figures that could stand and cheer on cue. Lined up perfectly in camera, this full-scale set and hanging miniature combined into one of the most impressive settings in Hollywood history. Gillespie worked on more than 600 pictures during his 50-year career and won 4 Academy Awards for special effects. His use of forced perspective and oversized sets in the 1940 science fiction thriller Dr. Cyclops is still considered one of the best examples of these in-camera effects. Forced perspective played an important role during the 1950s with a batch of low-budget pictures about giant mutants and tiny characters. In addition to the original Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, there were such B classics as The Amazing Colossal Man,
I don't want to grow anymore.
Attack of the Puppet People,
See, a baby doll take a bubble bath in a coffee can.
and The Incredible Shrinking Man.
Incredible, because every moment the terror mounts.
A much more prestigious film was Disney's 1959 musical fantasy, Darby O'Gill and the Little People. Academy Award-winning effects artist Peter Ellenshaw supervised what many consider the finest example of forced perspective on film. Ellenshaw designed Darby O'Gill to be shot on one huge stage. The difference in the actors' sizes was due solely to their distance from the camera.
The biggest problem was throwing the perspective, throwing the focus, because you had to focus both on the background and in the foreground. It was very difficult, because you had to have an enormous amount of light. We had to use so much enormous light on the set that eventually it blew the circuit breakers in the Burbank power station, and they never let us put that much light on again.
Years later, Peter's son Harrison Ellenshaw was called on by Disney Studios to create giant effects for Honey, I Blew Up the Kid.
I went to my father and I took a copy of Darby O'Gill and the Little People, and I said, let's go through this, you know, shot by shot, and you tell me what you did on each one, and we'll kind of discuss it and see if I can find a few tricks. Unfortunately, or fortunately, there were still some shots in there, both he and I, we don't know how they were done. And we'd look at them over and over, and he'd say, well, I think we did it. No, couldn't have done that because the camera moved. Or I think we did, no, couldn't have done that because he went behind that rock.
Before the studio would give the go-ahead on Honey, I Blew Up the Kid, extensive tests were made for the proposed forced perspective shots, with technicians from Buena Vista Visual Effects standing in for the actors. In the movie, Harrison successfully integrated age-old forced perspective techniques with state-of-the-art digital effects.
One thing that needs to be very clear in everybody's mind is that, for example, if you take the digital capabilities that we now have in visual effects, this doesn't necessarily replace old methods. It's merely a new method. And we are still doing things that were done 80 years ago. The thing that I've learned from my father that I appreciate the most is that he is a great believer in making a shot dramatic, making it impressive. He's always gone for the visual impact of a shot of whatever he's done, and I've tried to keep that with me.
Action.
Today, on the set of Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, Gene Warren Jr. and the effects crew use forced perspective to create visual impact on an enormous scale.
California Chardonnay. Not too pricey when you buy in bulk. Cheers.
All of our forced perspective setups involved building 8th scale miniatures that Darryl interacted with that also had to blend in to the actual full size which was in the background.
Precise miniature work is one of the keys to successful forced perspective, also known as split scale. In every split scale shot, there is a dividing line between the miniature and full-size sets, and the goal is to make that line invisible.
You try to find natural dividing lines, cracks in pavement, edges of doorways, or a post in the foreground. And sometimes if it doesn't exist, you make something there. You add something to the set.
For this shot, in which Hannah and Baldwin share an intimate dinner, forced perspective style, Gene and his crew created a dividing line, a drainage ditch running through the barnyard. The miniature and full-size sets are effectively blended along this dividing line, which continues up through the truck and barn.
Imagine love on the scale of Gulliver.
You are crazy. I'm calling you an immense mistake and an enormous, pathetic freak.
You son of a bitch!
You were sad before. Now you're just a big joke. If you knew half what Honey Parker knows...
I'm gonna pop your head like a little Concord grape!
Man.
We have to put in 4 helicopters on all these shots, on a few of these shots as they're flying through.
For Attack of the 50-Foot Woman, Gene is augmenting the forced perspective shots with other traditional visual effects in order to best sell the illusion of size.
Forced perspective was our showpiece effect in this, where we had big, large shots that married the live and the miniatures in dramatic dialogue scenes. However, there's these mixing and matching techniques in order to make it appear as if we're just shooting the movie with a 50-foot woman. We laced in here and there blue screen shots.
3, 2, 1, pull.
With blue screen, the filmmakers are able to shoot the actors against a blue background. The blue screen is later replaced with the actual background shot.
With Harry, as an example, he's hanging on wires, and we have to track that shot, meaning match his moves, so that when we put Nancy's hand around him, they stay married together as if she is holding them.
In this work print, also known as a rough cut, these blue screen shots have not yet been composited with their backgrounds.
Miss me?
I don't suppose you want to hear my side of this.
Another way the filmmakers create the illusion of size is by shooting split-scale sets and optically compositing the two sides of the screen.
So it's a little larger.
For this scene inside the barn, the right side of the screen was shot first inside the real barn. Then the next day, Darryl was shot inside a miniature barn. These split-scale shots are followed by a forced perspective shot to complete the giant illusion. Forced perspective almost always involves miniatures. For the scene in which Daryl Hannah falls and crushes a barn, Gene and his crew have built a second miniature barn set made of balsa wood.
Man.
For the final scene in which Nancy, now 70 feet tall, comes looking for her cheating husband, the entire fictitious town of Arnold, California, is being built in 1/12 scale. The buildings are modeled after actual structures in the Southern California towns of Taft and Maricopa, where location shooting took place. Hundreds of trees, streetlights, and telephone poles must also be constructed, along with miniature cars and other convincing details. This tiny town is built indoors at Fantasy 2, with each city block measuring 35 feet long and 22 feet wide.
Now, you're not going to put too many of those together and then still have something behind it and beyond, and the desert and the horizon and mountains and the night sky. So to achieve this within a limited amount of space, beyond the town, we started sloping up the desert to force the perspective.
Hundreds of miniature Joshua trees and thousands of tumbleweeds were made in 3 scales. By placing the larger ones closer to the camera and smaller ones farther away, the horizon appears to extend for miles, when the entire desert set is only 10 feet deep. After 3 months of design and construction, the town is built and ready for shooting. There is even a 1/12 scale model of Harry's Porsche. And of course, Harry himself. All this will help create the illusion of a giant Daryl Hannah.
Harry!
Finally, on film, the special effect is brought to life. The result is a totally believable 70-foot character.
The most exciting part of the work is the satisfaction at the end. If you can fool your peers, if you can fool the audience, and if people wonder, number one, how it was done, generally you have a successful shot.
Every job is a little different, new challenges, learn new things, figure out how to make it work.
Forced perspective may be one of the oldest tricks in the visual effects book, but it can still be as effective as the days when Gene Warren Sr. made Tom the size of a thumb. Today, effects wizards like Gene Warren Jr. and his sons are able to utilize the same techniques, proving that size is in the eye of the beholder. And in this high-tech era, Attack of the 50-Foot Woman continues the tradition of some of the earliest special effects used in motion pictures.
The doctor said it's all right as long as I don't get too worked up.
That's an important thing to remember about not getting too worked up.
In the end, Nancy gets her husband to herself. Harry gets what he deserves. And thanks to forced perspective, we get some rather large-scale movie magic.